Welcome to Manny Champion. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the devastated streets of Cebu as Manny Pacquiao stepped out of his vehicle, his eyes immediately drawn to the overwhelming scene of destruction that stretched before him. The magnitude 6.9 earthquake that had struck the central Philippines just 48 hours earlier had transformed the familiar landscape into something almost unrecognizable. Buildings that once stood proudly now lay in crumbled heaps of concrete and twisted metal, their skeletal remains reaching toward the sky like broken fingers. The champion boxer, dressed in simple work clothes and sturdy boots, had arrived in the disaster zone not as a celebrity seeking attention, but as a son of the Philippines responding to his people's desperate need. News reports had painted a grim picture of the catastrophe that claimed 69 lives and injured over 140 people. But witnessing the devastation firsthand struck him with a force more powerful than any punch he had ever received in the ring. Manny walked slowly through the debris-strewn streets of San Remigio, one of the hardest-hit areas near the epicenter, close to Bogo City. The acrid smell of dust and broken concrete filled his nostrils, while the distant sounds of rescue equipment and emergency sirens created a haunting symphony of human determination against nature's fury. Every step revealed new evidence of the earthquake's merciless power: overturned vehicles, collapsed storefronts, and personal belongings scattered like confetti across the fractured pavement. The boxer's trained eyes, accustomed to reading opponents and assessing situations quickly, took in the organized chaos of the rescue operation. Emergency workers moved with practiced efficiency, their bright orange vests creating moving patches of color against the gray backdrop of destruction. Local volunteers, many of them residents who had lost their own homes, worked alongside professional rescue teams with an unwavering spirit that reminded Manny why he had always been proud to call himself Filipino. As he approached the main rescue coordination center, Manny noticed the exhaustion etched on the faces of the workers who had been laboring around the clock since the disaster struck. Their clothes were caked with dust and sweat, their movements showing the strain of endless hours spent searching through rubble for survivors and clearing pathways for emergency vehicles. The magnitude of the task ahead became crystal clear as he observed the systematic approach required to address each collapsed structure, each blocked road, each family still waiting for news of missing loved ones. The boxer's hands, which had delivered countless victories in rings around the world, now clenched involuntarily as he witnessed elderly residents sitting on makeshift benches outside what remained of their homes. Their weathered faces bore expressions of shock and displacement, their eyes holding the particular emptiness that comes from losing everything familiar in a matter of seconds. Children clung to their parents, their usual playfulness replaced by a quiet confusion that spoke to the trauma of experiencing such sudden and violent change. Manny's mind raced back to his own childhood experiences of hardship and uncertainty, remembering the feeling of helplessness that comes from circumstances beyond one's control. The poverty he had known growing up in General Santos City had taught him about resilience, but it had also instilled in him a deep understanding of what it meant to need help and to have nowhere else to turn. These earthquake victims were experiencing that same vulnerability, that same desperate hope for assistance from anyone willing to extend a helping hand. The rescue operation commander, a seasoned emergency management official, briefed volunteers on the day's priorities, clearing debris from critical access routes, searching for survivors in partially collapsed buildings, and distributing essential supplies to displaced families. The systematic nature of disaster response impressed Manny, but he also recognized that behind every organized effort were individual stories of loss, fear, and the fundamental human need for compassion. Standing at the edge of what had once been a bustling neighborhood marketplace, Manny felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. His fame and resources had always been tools he could use to help others, but this disaster demanded something more personal, more immediate. The people of Cebu needed hands willing to move concrete, backs strong enough to carry supplies, and hearts brave enough to venture into dangerous areas where hope might still be found beneath the rubble. The champion removed his watch and rolled up his sleeves, ready to transform from observer to participant in this massive humanitarian effort. Without hesitation, Manny joined the nearest rescue team that was methodically working through the collapsed remains of a three-story residential building where several families were believed to be trapped. The structure had pancaked during the violent shaking, leaving only narrow gaps between the concrete slabs that had once been separate floors. The rescue coordinator handed him a pair of heavy work gloves and a dust mask, standard equipment for anyone entering the dangerous maze of twisted rebar and unstable debris. The boxer's athletic conditioning, honed through decades of rigorous training, proved invaluable as he began the painstaking work of moving chunks of concrete and broken masonry. Each piece had to be carefully assessed before removal, as the wrong move could trigger a secondary collapse that would endanger both trapped victims and rescue workers. Manny's hands, which had learned precision through countless hours of hitting speed bags and heavy bags, now applied that same careful control to lifting and passing debris in a human chain of volunteers. The work was backbreaking and methodical, requiring the kind of sustained effort that reminded Manny of his most grueling training sessions. Sweat poured down his face as he bent, lifted, and carried load after load of broken concrete, his muscles burning with the familiar ache of physical exertion pushed to its limits. The dust cloud that surrounded the rescue site coated everyone in a fine grey powder, making breathing difficult despite the protective masks, and turning the workers into ghostly figures moving through an apocalyptic landscape. As the morning progressed, Manny found himself working alongside Angelo, a local construction worker whose own home had been damaged but who had immediately volunteered for rescue duty. The man's expertise in understanding building structures proved invaluable as they navigated the dangerous terrain of collapsed walls and exposed electrical wiring. Together, they developed an efficient rhythm of communication through hand signals and subtle movements, maximizing their effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary risks. The psychological toll of the work became apparent as they uncovered personal belongings buried in the rubble: children's toys, family photographs, cooking utensils, and clothing that spoke to the normal lives that had been shattered in mere seconds. Manny carefully set aside each recovered item, understanding that these seemingly insignificant objects might represent the only remaining connections that survivors would have to their previous lives. The weight of responsibility he felt extended beyond the physical labor to preserving the dignity and memories of the affected families. Emergency medical teams worked in parallel with the debris removal crews, standing ready to provide immediate care for any survivors who might be discovered. Their presence served as a constant reminder of the race against time that defined earthquake rescue operations, where each passing hour reduced the likelihood of finding people alive beneath the wreckage. The professional calm of the medical personnel contrasted sharply with the emotional intensity that surrounded every potential discovery. The boxer's fame meant nothing in this environment where only physical capability and willingness to help mattered. He worked without special treatment or recognition, just another pair of strong hands contributing to the collective effort. Other volunteers, initially surprised to see the world champion among them, quickly accepted his presence as natural and appropriate, understanding that disasters strip away artificial distinctions and reveal the fundamental equality of human need and human response. By midday, the rescue team had successfully created several access tunnels into the collapsed building, allowing specialized search equipment to probe deeper into the structure. The systematic approach required patience and discipline, qualities that Manny's boxing career had taught him to value, even when adrenaline and emotion urged faster action. Each small victory in clearing debris brought them closer to the possibility of reaching trapped survivors, maintaining hope in the face of overwhelming destruction. The relentless physical demands of the work, combined with the emotional weight of the situation, created a unique form of exhaustion that penetrated beyond mere muscle fatigue. Yet Manny continued moving concrete and steel, driven by the same determination that had carried him through championship fights, knowing that somewhere beneath the rubble, families were counting on their efforts for survival. The afternoon heat intensified the already challenging conditions as Manny and the rescue team continued their methodical excavation of the collapsed residential building. The combination of physical exertion and the tropical climate created an almost unbearable environment, but the boxer pushed through the discomfort with the same mental toughness that had sustained him through 12-round championship battles. His shirt, completely soaked with perspiration, clung to his back as he maneuvered through the increasingly complex network of tunnels they had carved through the debris. Suddenly, a faint tapping sound echoed from deep within the wreckage, causing every rescue worker to freeze in place. The rhythmic pattern was unmistakably human, a desperate Morse code of survival that sent electricity through the entire team. Manny felt his heart rate spike as the search coordinator quickly organized the workers into a more focused formation, directing their efforts toward the source of the sound. The discovery transformed the atmosphere from methodical determination to urgent hope, energizing everyone despite their exhaustion. The rescue team worked with renewed intensity, but also with greater caution, knowing that hasty movements could endanger whoever was trapped below. Manny found himself assigned to a critical position in the human chain, responsible for carefully removing smaller pieces of debris that others passed back from the advancing excavation point. His boxing-trained reflexes proved valuable in catching and redirecting falling chunks of concrete that could have injured workers or destabilized the rescue tunnel. As they drew closer to the source of the tapping, additional sounds became audible. Muffled voices and what appeared to be multiple people trapped in a pocket of space that had somehow survived the building's collapse. The rescue coordinator called for specialized listening equipment and structural engineers to assess the stability of their approach route. Manny watched as these experts worked with instruments that could detect the slightest sounds and movements, their technology complementing the raw human effort that had brought them this far. The boxer's mind wandered briefly to his own family, imagining how Jinky and their children would feel if they were trapped in such circumstances. The thought of Jimuel, Michael, Princess, Queen Elizabeth, and Israel facing such terror filled him with a protective fury that he channeled into his work. Every piece of debris he moved brought someone else's family closer to safety, and that knowledge drove him to ignore the burning sensation in his muscles and the cuts accumulating on his hands despite the protective gloves. Emergency medical personnel positioned themselves as close as possible to the excavation site, preparing for the moment when trapped survivors might be reached. Their presence created a sense of anticipation that was both exciting and nerve-wracking, as everyone understood that the condition of any discovered victims remained completely unknown. Manny observed the medical team's preparations with admiration, recognizing the skill and dedication required to provide care in such challenging circumstances. The tapping sounds grew stronger and more frequent as the rescue tunnel advanced, suggesting that the trapped individuals were aware of the rescue efforts and were responding with increased hope. This communication between rescuers and victims created an emotional connection that transcended the physical barriers of concrete and steel. Manny felt personally invested in reaching these unknown people, their survival becoming a mission that engaged every fiber of his being. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the disaster zone, reminding everyone that time was a critical factor in earthquake rescue operations. The boxer's endurance, built through years of training for fights that could last up to an hour of intense physical combat, served him well as the rescue work entered its most crucial phase. Each movement of debris brought them closer to what everyone hoped would be a miraculous discovery of life, persisting against overwhelming odds. The rescue tunnel had progressed to a depth of nearly 12 feet when the breakthrough finally occurred. A small opening, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, revealed a pocket of space where 3 members of the Reyes family had survived the building's collapse. Manny watched in amazement as the first rescue worker squeezed through the narrow passage, his headlamp illuminating the faces of survivors who had spent over 50 hours trapped in darkness. The emotional impact of the discovery rippled through the entire rescue team, validating every hour of backbreaking labor they had invested in this operation. Manny felt tears mixing with the sweat and dust on his face as he witnessed the careful extraction of Esperanza Reyes, an elderly grandmother who had shielded her 2 young grandchildren with her own body when the building collapsed. The woman's courage and the children's resilience embodied the indomitable spirit that had always made Manny proud to be Filipino. The medical team immediately took charge of the survivors, conducting rapid assessments while preparing them for transport to the emergency medical facility that had been established in a nearby school. Manny stepped back to allow the professionals to work, but he remained close enough to observe the reunion between the rescued family members and their relatives who had been waiting anxiously outside the disaster zone. The joy and relief on their faces reminded him why he had chosen to spend his time here rather than in the comfort of his own home. As word of the successful rescue spread throughout the disaster area, other rescue teams working on different collapsed structures felt renewed motivation for their own efforts. The boxer understood that hope was contagious in these situations and that one successful rescue could energize an entire operation. He watched as volunteers who had been showing signs of exhaustion suddenly found new strength, their movements becoming more purposeful and determined. The rescue coordinator immediately redirected resources to expand the tunnel system, as thermal imaging equipment had detected additional heat signatures deeper within the collapsed building. Manny volunteered to continue working, despite having been on site for over 8 hours, his competitive nature refusing to accept rest when others might still need help. The physical demands of the work had pushed his body to limits that reminded him of his most challenging training camps, but the emotional rewards far exceeded anything he had experienced in professional boxing. The afternoon rescue had attracted media attention, with news crews arriving to document the ongoing relief efforts. Manny noticed the cameras but deliberately avoided them, focusing entirely on the work at hand rather than any potential publicity. His presence at the disaster site was about service, not recognition, and he made sure his actions reflected that priority. The other volunteers appreciated his low-key approach, treating him as an equal partner in their shared mission rather than a celebrity making a token appearance. As evening approached, portable lighting systems were installed around the rescue site to allow work to continue through the night. The boxer marveled at the dedication of the emergency workers, who had been operating continuously since the earthquake struck, many of them local residents who had lost their own homes but continued helping others. Their selflessness reminded him of the values his mother Dionysia had instilled in him during his childhood in General Santos City. The successful rescue had also attracted additional volunteers from surrounding communities, creating a growing army of helpers who brought fresh energy to the relief efforts. Manny watched as new arrivals were quickly integrated into existing teams, their enthusiasm combining with the experience of veterans who had been working since the disaster began. The collaborative spirit demonstrated the best aspects of Filipino culture, where community solidarity emerged strongest during times of greatest need. As darkness settled over the disaster zone, powerful floodlights transformed the rescue site into an otherworldly landscape of stark shadows and brilliant illumination. Manny had been working for nearly 12 hours, but the successful rescue of the Reyes family had energized him beyond any physical fatigue. The boxer moved with renewed purpose through the debris field, his body operating on the same reserves of determination that had carried him through the later rounds of his most grueling championship fights. The night shift brought a different rhythm to the rescue operation, with teams rotating to ensure that fresh workers maintained the intensive pace required for effective debris removal. Manny observed the seamless coordination between day and night crews, impressed by the professional organization that kept the operation running continuously. The emergency management officials had clearly learned from previous disasters, implementing systems that maximized efficiency while protecting worker safety in the challenging conditions. The thermal imaging equipment had confirmed the presence of at least 2 more heat signatures in different sections of the collapsed building, driving the rescue teams to establish multiple excavation points simultaneously. Manny found himself assigned to a new tunnel system that required navigating through a particularly unstable section of the structure. The work demanded absolute concentration, as each piece of debris had to be evaluated for its structural importance before removal. Working alongside Bayani, a local firefighter whose expertise in emergency situations proved invaluable, Manny learned to read the subtle signs that indicated safe versus dangerous areas within the collapsed building. The firefighters' knowledge of how structures failed during earthquakes helped guide their approach, ensuring that their rescue efforts did not inadvertently cause additional collapses that could endanger both trapped victims and rescue workers. The boxer's hands, now covered with cuts and bruises despite the protective gloves, continued their methodical work of moving concrete chunks and twisted metal. The repetitive nature of the labor created a meditative state that reminded him of the countless hours he had spent hitting heavy bags in preparation for major fights. The physical pain became secondary to the mental focus required to maintain precision and safety in such dangerous conditions. emergency medical teams had established a more comprehensive field hospital in the nearby basketball court, equipped with advanced trauma care capabilities for treating crush injuries and other earthquake-related medical emergencies. Manny watched ambulances arriving and departing throughout the night, carrying both rescued survivors and rescue workers who had been injured during the operation. The constant medical activity served as a sobering reminder of the human cost associated with natural disasters. The night air carried the sounds of multiple rescue operations occurring simultaneously throughout the affected area, creating a symphony of determination that echoed across the devastated neighborhoods. Generators powering the floodlights and rescue equipment provided a constant mechanical hum that mixed with the voices of coordinators directing the various teams. Manny found the organized chaos strangely comforting, evidence that human beings could respond to overwhelming challenges with systematic effectiveness. As the hours passed, the boxer noticed how the shared hardship had created bonds between volunteers who had been strangers just days earlier. The extreme circumstances stripped away social barriers and economic differences, leaving only the fundamental human desire to help others in need. Manny worked alongside construction workers, teachers, students, and retirees, all united by their commitment to saving lives regardless of personal cost. The second successful rescue of the night occurred around midnight, when the team working in the eastern section of the building reached a trapped construction worker who had been pinned beneath a concrete beam. The man's survival after more than 60 hours demonstrated the incredible resilience of the human spirit, inspiring everyone to continue their efforts with renewed hope that additional survivors might still be found in the remaining unexplored sections of the collapsed structure. The early morning hours brought a sobering discovery that reminded everyone of the earthquake's devastating toll. As Manny's team carefully excavated a section of the collapsed building's ground floor, they uncovered the body of an elderly man who had not survived the initial collapse. The moment demanded a respectful pause in the rescue operation, as emergency personnel carefully recovered the victim, while maintaining the dignity that every life deserved, even in death. The boxer felt the emotional weight of the discovery settle heavily on his shoulders, understanding that this represented one of the 69 confirmed fatalities from the magnitude 6.9 earthquake that had shattered so many lives across the central Philippines. The reality of loss mixed with the hope of rescue created a complex emotional landscape that tested the mental resilience of every volunteer. Manny drew upon the same psychological strength that had helped him overcome defeats in the boxing ring, channeling his grief into renewed determination to save whoever might still be alive. The recovery process required the same careful attention to structural safety that characterized the rescue efforts, but with the added burden of handling human remains with appropriate reverence. Manny watched as the emergency personnel worked with professional compassion, their movements reflecting both technical expertise and deep respect for the deceased. The scene reinforced his understanding that disaster response involved not only saving lives, but also honoring those who could not be saved. As dawn approached, the rescue coordinator called for a brief memorial moment to acknowledge the victim before continuing with the search for survivors. The assembled volunteers, representing dozens of different backgrounds and communities, stood together in silent recognition of the human cost of natural disasters. Manny felt connected to every person present, united by their shared commitment to helping others despite the emotional toll of witnessing such profound loss. The discovery had occurred in an area where thermal imaging had detected no heat signatures, confirming the accuracy of the technology that guided their rescue priorities. This validation of their systematic approach provided some comfort, assuring the teams that their efforts were being directed toward the locations most likely to yield living survivors. Manny appreciated the scientific precision that complemented the raw human determination driving the rescue operation. The morning shift change brought fresh volunteers to replace those who had worked through the night, but Manny chose to remain on site despite having been active for over 18 hours. His boxing conditioning had prepared him for extended physical exertion, but more importantly, his personal commitment to the rescue effort transcended normal considerations of rest and comfort. The faces of the survivors they had already rescued motivated him to continue searching for others who might still be trapped. News of the overnight rescue successes had spread throughout the disaster zone, attracting additional volunteers and resources to support the ongoing operation. Manny observed the growing crowd of helpers with mixed emotions, grateful for the increased manpower, while concerned about maintaining the coordination and safety protocols that had made their efforts effective. The challenge of managing larger numbers of well-intentioned volunteers required the same strategic thinking he applied to boxing matches. The medical teams reported that the rescued survivors were responding well to treatment, with no life-threatening injuries despite their prolonged entrapment. This positive news energized the rescue workers, providing evidence that their careful excavation techniques were successfully protecting trapped victims from additional harm during the extraction process. Manny felt proud to be part of an operation that combined speed with safety, maximizing the chances of successful rescues. The contrast between loss and hope that defined earthquake rescue work had become a central theme of Manny's experience at the disaster site. Each discovery, whether tragic or triumphant, reinforced his understanding of life's fragility and the importance of human compassion in the face of overwhelming natural forces. As the second day of rescue operations progressed, Manny expanded his efforts beyond the collapsed residential building to assist with the broader relief operation that was addressing the needs of the more than 3 million people affected by the earthquake across the central Philippines region. The boxer joined teams distributing emergency supplies to families who had lost their homes, carrying boxes of food, water, and medical supplies through the makeshift camps that had sprouted throughout the disaster zone. The displacement camps revealed the earthquake's impact on ordinary Filipino families who had lost everything in a matter of seconds. Manny moved quietly among the temporary shelters, helping to distribute blankets and basic necessities while observing the resilience of people who faced uncertain futures with remarkable dignity. Children played simple games with improvised toys, while their parents organized community kitchens and shared whatever resources they had managed to salvage from their destroyed homes. The logistical challenges of providing aid to such a large affected population required the same systematic approach that had guided the rescue operations. Manny worked alongside relief coordinators who managed the complex task of ensuring that supplies reached the most vulnerable families first, prioritizing elderly residents, pregnant women, and families with young children. The boxer's celebrity status proved useful in this context, as his presence helped attract additional donations and volunteer support for the relief effort. Working in the supply distribution area brought Manny into direct contact with earthquake survivors who shared their stories of the terrifying moments when the magnitude 6.9 tremor struck their communities. He listened to accounts of families separated in the chaos, of neighbors helping neighbors escape from damaged buildings, and of the incredible courage displayed by ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. These personal narratives reinforced his understanding of the earthquake's human impact, beyond the statistics of casualties and structural damage. The boxer's hands, now bandaged from cuts sustained during debris removal, continued their work of loading and unloading supply trucks that arrived throughout the day from relief organizations across the Philippines. The physical labor felt different from the intense precision required for rescue work, but it provided its own satisfaction as he witnessed the immediate impact of delivering essential supplies to families in desperate need. Emergency shelter construction had become a priority as authorities recognized that many displaced families would require temporary housing for weeks or months while permanent reconstruction took place. Manny joined work crews assembling prefabricated structures that would provide basic protection from the elements for families who had been sleeping outdoors since the earthquake struck. The construction work utilized skills he had developed during his youth in General Santos City, when economic necessity had required him to take on various manual labor jobs. The afternoon brought news that search and rescue operations at several other collapsed buildings throughout the affected region had successfully located additional survivors, bringing the total number of people rescued alive to over 30. This information energized the entire relief operation, demonstrating that the systematic approach being employed across multiple disaster sites was yielding positive results. Manny felt proud to be part of a coordinated response that was saving lives throughout the central Philippines. Medical teams reported that the injured survivors were receiving appropriate care at hospitals that had been reinforced with additional staff and equipment from unaffected regions. The healthcare response impressed Manny with its efficiency and compassion as medical professionals worked around the clock to treat everything from minor injuries to serious trauma cases. The coordination between rescue operations and medical care exemplified the kind of comprehensive disaster response that maximized the chances of survival for earthquake victims. As evening approached, Manny reflected on the transformation he had witnessed in himself and others over the past 2 days, recognizing that disaster response revealed the best aspects of human nature while testing individual and collective resilience in ways that few other experiences could match. As the third day of relief operations dawned, Manny stood at the edge of the disaster zone, where he had spent the most transformative 72 hours of his life. The collapsed residential building that had consumed so much of his energy and attention now showed clear evidence of the systematic rescue effort that had saved multiple lives. The carefully excavated tunnels and organized debris piles represented more than just physical labor. They embodied the collective determination of hundreds of volunteers who had refused to accept defeat in the face of overwhelming destruction. The final search operations had concluded with the rescue of 2 additional survivors, bringing the total number of people saved from this single building to 7. Manny felt profound satisfaction knowing that his hands had moved the concrete and steel that created pathways to life for these individuals. The physical exhaustion that permeated every muscle in his body paled in comparison to the emotional fulfillment that came from participating in something larger than any championship victory he had ever achieved. The boxer's presence at the disaster site had attracted significant media attention, but more importantly, it had inspired other prominent Filipinos to contribute their own resources and time to the relief effort. The ripple effect of his participation demonstrated how individual actions could catalyze broader community response, multiplying the impact of disaster relief far beyond what any single person could accomplish alone. Manny understood that his fame carried responsibilities that extended well beyond entertainment and athletic achievement. Emergency management officials reported that the coordinated rescue operations across all affected areas had successfully located and rescued over 100 survivors from collapsed structures throughout the central Philippines. The systematic approach that had guided their work at this site had been replicated at dozens of other locations, creating a comprehensive response that maximized the chances of survival for earthquake victims. The success rate validated the training and preparation that emergency responders had developed through years of experience with natural disasters. The relief operation would continue for weeks as communities began the long process of rebuilding their lives and infrastructure. Manny had committed to maintaining his involvement beyond the immediate rescue phase, pledging financial support for reconstruction efforts and ongoing assistance for displaced families. His foundation would establish a dedicated fund to help earthquake victims rebuild their homes and businesses, ensuring that his contribution extended far beyond the physical labor he had provided during the critical first days. The boxer's experience working alongside ordinary Filipinos, who had demonstrated extraordinary courage and compassion, had reinforced his connection to his homeland and its people. The volunteers he had met represented the best aspects of Filipino culture: resilience in the face of adversity, willingness to sacrifice for others, and the strength that comes from community solidarity. These qualities had sustained him throughout his boxing career, and witnessing them in action during the disaster response reminded him of the values that truly mattered. As Manny prepared to leave the disaster site, he carried with him the faces and stories of the people he had helped rescue and assist: the elderly grandmother who had protected her grandchildren, the construction worker who had survived 60 hours beneath concrete, and the countless families who had lost everything but maintained their dignity and hope. These memories would stay with him forever, serving as reminders of the fragility of life and the importance of using whatever gifts and resources one possessed to help others. The magnitude 6.9 earthquake that had claimed 69 lives and injured over 140 people had also revealed the incredible capacity for human compassion and cooperation in the face of natural disasters. Manny's participation in the rescue and relief efforts represented just one thread in a vast tapestry of heroism that had emerged from tragedy, demonstrating that even the most devastating events could not destroy the fundamental goodness that existed within the Filipino spirit. Thank you for watching another episode of Manny Champion. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.